when we discuss oligopolies, we're discussing a market in which there are just a few firms, and because there are so few firms, there's some incentive for those firms to work together and to behave strategically in order to maximize profits. And there's a branch of mathematics called game theory that can help us to understand how firms or individuals behave in these types of situations. So game theory, as I said, is a branch of math that economists use to analyze strategic behavior of decision makers. So in thinking about these sort of situations, we can describe what firms are doing, or individuals in a similar strategic kind of scenario. We can describe what they're doing in terms of a game. And there are three basic components of a game. You've got to have players, you've got to have strategies or moves or options for what are the players' options to do as they play the game. And you got to have payoffs. You have to have a reason to play. What do I win, right? How do I win and what do I win? And games can be played either simultaneously or sequentially. And you'll see as we go through the next few videos what I mean by that. But a simultaneous game is a game in which players make their choices or make their moves at the same time without seeing or knowing what the other player is doing before they have to choose, right? So something like a card game where you make your choice, you put your cards face down, and on the count of 3, everybody turns their cards over, right? So you had to make your choice before knowing what the other person was doing. Or a game can be played sequentially, which is like a lot of the board games that we play, where I move, you see what I have done, and then you move in response to that, right? So we make our moves in sequence rather than simultaneously. We're going to start with looking at simultaneous games. And one particular simultaneous game that's especially famous and useful for thinking about how individuals behave is called the prisoner's dilemma. So here's how it works. You have two suspects who are being interrogated separately, and each has the option either to testify or to keep quiet, right? So they're in two separate rooms. No one knows what the other is going to do, right? You're having to decide, should I talk or should I keep quiet, without knowing what your partner in crime is doing in the other room, right? But you do know that you each have the same options. You know that the cops are going to ask your buddy to testify or keep quiet as well, right? So you each have the same options. And the possible outcomes are as follows. If everybody keeps quiet, then you each get 1 year in jail, right? If both of you testify, then assumedly against each other, right? You rat on the other one, then each of you gets 10 years in jail. But here's the kicker. If one testifies and the other keeps quiet, so if I decide not to talk but my buddy does rat on me, then the one who testifies goes free, right, as a deal to get you to talk, while the suspect who kept quiet gets 25 years in jail because you got told on, right? So this is how the game works. This is the prisoner's dilemma. And we can represent this dilemma as a table like this. So in this table, our two different prisoners our suspects are Manny and Tony, right? And Tony, in this case, is all the blue stuff, and Manny is all the red stuff. And if you don't have colors when you're working these as examples, then just be sure that you have things labeled correctly to keep track of what belongs to whom. So Tony has options either to testify or to keep quiet. And Manny also has those same options, to testify or to keep quiet. And the boxes in this table, the cells in the table, tell us the outcomes if that combination of choices happens, right? So if Manny testifies, or if Tony testifies and Manny testifies, we're in this table, this cell here. Each of them gets 10 years in jail. If Tony keeps quiet, but Manny testifies, Tony gets 25 years, Manny goes free. And similarly down here, if Tony testifies, Manny keeps quiet, we're here. If Tony keeps quiet, Manny keeps quiet, then we're here. If everybody keeps quiet, then they each just get 1 year in jail. So this is how we represent this sort of scenario where these prisoners, these suspects are in this dilemma of, do we cooperate? Can I trust you or not? What do I choose? And I have to choose simultaneously as you are choosing without knowing what you're going to do. So how do we know where we're going to end up? What will they do? We can analyze this game and try to figure out what is the best option for each of the two suspects. And we analyze it in light of a Nash equilibrium. So we've mentioned the Nash equilibrium briefly in a previous video, but let's really dig in and look at a Nash equilibrium now. So a Nash equilibrium happens. It's that situation where each decision maker is choosing the best response to what the other decision maker has chosen. So you don't know what they're going to choose, but at the end of the day, when everybody shows their cards, if you've chosen the best option based on now knowing what they chose, and they the same, then we call that a Nash equilibrium. So in a Nash equilibrium, everyone opts to keep the status quo. You're happy with where you ended up, given that now you know what the other guy did, right? There's no incentive for either decision maker to change what he or she is doing. And I call the Nash equilibrium the no regrets equilibrium, because it's at the end of the game, right? You've already made your choice and they've already made their choice, but now you show your cards. And once you've shown your cards, question is, do you have a regret? Now that you know what the other guy did, are you glad you did what you did? Or do you regret what you did? Right? And if both players are glad they did what they did, if no one has any regrets, now that they've seen the cards, if no one has any regrets, then this is a Nash equilibrium. Right? So how do we get to a Nash equilibrium? Sometimes the players will have what's called a dominant strategy. So a best response for a player to choose no matter what the other player chooses. So when you're looking at your options, you don't know what the other guy's going to do, but given that you know what their options are, when you look at your options, if it turns out that regardless of what they choose, your best response is a particular one, either way, then that would be your dominant strategy. And if each player has a dominant strategy, that makes up the dominant strategy equilibrium. And I think all this will make more sense when we actually go through the game in a minute. So just mark down these definitions, and then we'll look at them in light of the prisoner's dilemma, and I think it'll make more sense when we see them in action. So the Nash equilibrium happens when each decision maker is choosing his or her best response to what the other decision maker has chosen. So a pair of strategies, one for each player, so that neither player wants to deviate, wants to change their mind. Neither player has a regret at the end of the day. Okay, so let's look at how this all plays out in terms of the prisoner's dilemma. So we're back to our table here that represents the prisoner's dilemma with Tony and Manny. And the best way to analyze or to go through thinking about the prisoner's dilemma is to put yourself in each player or each suspect's shoes, one at a time. So let's start by thinking of ourselves as Manny, right? I'm Manny. I'm sitting in a room by myself with the interrogator, and I know that I've been given two options. I can either testify or I can keep quiet, right? I also know that my buddy Tony is in another room and has been given the same two options. I don't know what Tony's gonna do. But when I'm thinking about what I should do, I can ask myself, what if Tony testifies? Right? So if Tony chooses to testify, remember, I don't know what Tony's going to do, but if he chooses to testify, then what's my best bet? If Tony chooses to testify, then we know we're in this column, right? And in this column, if I'm Manny, what I'm looking at is either 10 years in jail or 25 years in jail. Which one's better for me? Obviously, 10 years in jail is better. And so if Tony chooses to testify, my best response is also to testify. But I don't know what Tony's going to do, so I have to ask myself, I have to keep going with the what ifs, right? What if Tony keeps quiet? If Tony keeps quiet, then we're in this column, and my options as Manny are either to go free or to spend a year in jail. Which is better? Clearly, going free is better than spending a year in jail. And so, if I'm Manny, it looks like, regardless of what Tony does, my best response, if I don't want to have a regret at the end of the day, then I should testify, right? If Tony testifies, it's better for me to testify. If Tony keeps quiet, it's better for me to testify. Either way, I don't know what Tony will do, but regardless of what Tony does, it's best for me, my best response is to testify. This is a dominant strategy. So notice when we use these circles here to circle what Manny should do, both of those circles are in the same row for Manny. That signifies that that's my dominant strategy, right? It doesn't matter what Tony does. My best response is to testify. Testifying is my dominant strategy. Tony, on the other hand, has a very similar story, right? So we've analyzed this as though we're Manny. Now let's go see what we would do if we're Tony. So if I'm Tony, I'm in the same situation. I don't know what Manny's going to do, but I know what his options are. And so I can ask myself, what if? What if Manny testifies? If Manny testifies, we're in this row, and my options as Tony are either 10 years in jail or 25 years in jail. And of course, 10 is better than 25. But I don't know that Manny's going to testify. What if he keeps quiet? If Manny keeps quiet, we're in this row, and my options as Tony are either to go free or to spend a year in jail. And going free is much better than a year in jail. And so for Tony, just like for Manny, we have a dominant strategy. I don't know what Manny's going to do, but regardless of what he does, at the end of the day, the best response for me is to testify, right? And when we're analyzing this, whenever we see two circles in the same box, right, in the same spot in this table, that signifies that we have a Nash equilibrium. In this case, it's also a dominant strategy equilibrium because both players have a dominant strategy of testifying. So when they do that, when they choose their dominant strategy, they each testify, then we're in this box up here, this cell, and that's our dominant strategy equilibrium. It's also the Nash equilibrium. This is the place where at the end of the day, when everyone shows their cards, no one has any regrets, right? And you can walk through the other cells of this table and see that that's not true. So if we were here, if Tony keeps quiet and Manny testifies, who has a regret? Tony does, right? Tony wishes he had testified because now that he knows what Manny did, now that all the cards are on the table, he's upset because Manny has testified and he wishes he had testified as well, right? So that he would have 10 years in jail as opposed to 25. And so Tony has a regret in this scenario. What about down here? If everyone keeps quiet, then each of them actually has a regret because, dang it, I'm Tony, right? If I had known Manny was going to keep quiet, I could have testified and gone free, right? I have a regret. I could have testified and gone free. Same for Manny. If I had known that Tony was going to keep quiet, I could have testified and gone free, right? So everybody has a regret down here, and in this spot, Manny is the one who has a regret because Tony has testified against him. He wishes he had also testified so that he would have 10 years instead of 25. And so we see if we go through this table, in each of these boxes, somebody has a regret. So we're not yet at the Nash equilibrium. The no regrets equilibrium only occurs here where everyone's testifying. And as you're analyzing these things, if you use those circles and you circle the best response as you analyze, then a Nash equilibrium is going to show up where there's two circles in the same cell of the table, right? Notice that the Nash equilibrium is actually not as good as if everyone had kept quiet. The cooperative outcome, if they were able to trust each other and had no incentive to cheat, right? They're able to trust each other and know for sure what the other guy's going to do, then everybody keeps quiet, they each serve their year, and they go home, right? The problem is, as we've seen in oligopoly behavior, that even if you make the pact before you go in, let's keep quiet, everybody has some incentive to cheat on the plan, right? And so you can't trust, because you're in two different rooms, you can't trust that Tony's going to stay quiet. Because it is in Tony's best interest, if you stay quiet, Tony can go free if he testifies, right? So there's some incentive to deviate from the cooperative plan, and because of that, everything sort of breaks down to where we have really the second best solution, not the absolute best cooperative solution. So the Nash equilibrium often is known as the second best outcome. It's the outcome that's stable, where no one wants to change their mind or has any incentive to change their mind. So the prisoner's dilemma captures the idea that cooperation is unstable. If you can't communicate with each other, if your life is on the line, you can't really trust that the other person's going to stick to the plan. And so at the end of the day, you do what's best for you, right? You cheat, essentially, on the plan. But in real life, we see that people do actually cooperate. Cooperation doesn't always break down. So what's wrong with this analysis? Nothing's really wrong with it, but we've left out one consideration. In this prisoner's dilemma, we're talking about the rest of your life, essentially, in prison, 25 years. And so it's kind of a one chance game, right? It's only played one time, where most of the time in life, our interactions occur over the long run, and players play a repeated game. So think about Manny and Tony as little kids on the playground at school getting in trouble, and they have to go individually and talk with the principal about it, right? It's not life in prison on the line. It's just, maybe somebody gets their mom called, or maybe you have to sit out of recess tomorrow or something like that, right? And so this is a different scenario, because now Manny sits in front of the principal and has to think not just what's best for me today, but what's best for me if this happens again, right? So maybe I should keep quiet, because I know that if I rat on Tony today, then when this happens again next week, he's going to rat on me. And that's not going to be good, right? So when we have a repeated game, when it's not a one-shot deal, then oftentimes we'll see that we do have some cooperation, because players will compare the short-run gains from cheating to the long-run losses they might suffer if that cooperation breaks down. So a lot of times they'll play a strategy instead of just playing what's best for me. They'll play sometimes the long-run strategy called tit for tat. So this is a strategy that promotes cooperation among players, because the players are mimicking each other's most recent decision and repaying in kind. So if I don't rat on you today, then you won't rat on me tomorrow, kind of thing, right? But as soon as somebody does cheat, as soon as Manny decides I'm telling, right, then it's all over from there. Now next time Tony's telling, because it's tit for tat, right? As long as everybody stays cooperative, then everybody's going to keep trucking along cooperatively. And you can think about to yourself in situations where you've been, why this sort of long run game sustains cooperation in a way that the one shot game may not.